Ivy Scholars. This is Miss Bender, and today we're going to do lesson 7.8.2. So I have to tell you that this one is a little bit longer than the others, and so what I'm doing is I'm going to give you 2 days to complete this one lesson. If you look at your notes, you'll notice that it's pretty long, and that's mostly because there are a lot of maps that we're going to be drawing on. And so I want to make sure that you know that's why the notes are so long. You really do need to know the voyages of exploration for each of these explorers. Also, my videos are broken up into 15-minute sections because it's easier for me to publish them that way. So at the end of part 1, you'll go to part 2 and then to part 3. And I know it's a bit of a hassle, but that's the best we can do right now. So you can either do all of these in one day, either Wednesday or Thursday, or if you'd rather break it up over the 2 days, that's perfectly fine. It is your choice. Today's learning target is to name and describe major European explorers' journeys. We're going to start with our vocabulary. We've got a lot of people that we're going to be learning for this lesson. The first one is Bartolomeu Dias. Bartolomeu Dias is a Portuguese explorer who traveled to the tip of Africa. Remember, Henry, the navigator, sent out expeditions along the western coast, but Bartolomeu made it all the way down to the tip of Africa, and this is important because it proves that the Atlantic Ocean is connected to the Indian Ocean. Vasco da Gama is our next explorer. He's also from Portugal, and he traveled around Africa to India. So he was able to establish direct line of trade from Portugal to India, which was the ultimate goal, actually, because remember, we want to bypass all of the middlemen in the Islamic world, all the trade that goes on between Europe and the Far East. Christopher Columbus, you guys are familiar with him, sailed for the Spanish to find a western route to India and found America instead. He couldn't go south because that's where the Portuguese were, so he decided to go west. Amerigo Vespucci sailed to the land that Columbus found, and he realized that it was a new world. Notice his name is Amerigo. Notice we live in America. It's named after him because of his discovery. Ferdinand Magellan, his expedition sailed around the entire Earth. He went around the full planet. Most people knew the Earth was round. Aristotle figured that out, and a lot of people know Aristotle by this time, but nobody had ever actually proven it until Ferdinand Magellan set off on his expedition. Hernando de Soto is another explorer who explored the southeastern United States, and he sailed for Spain. Now, he did other things too, like he helped to conquer the Inca Empire, but he also stumbled upon the Mississippi River. So when we say that they discovered things that were already there, we have to realize we're talking about European discoveries. The natives were already there, and they already knew about it. But we're looking from the Europeans' point of view. Jacques Cartier is the next explorer, and he explored Canada, and he came from France. And then the other explorer we have here is Henry Hudson. Henry Hudson also explored Canadian territory, but he sailed first for Denmark and then again later for England, looking for a passage from Europe to Asia going north instead of south. So let's review. Which European country has started this age of exploration? The Portuguese. That's right, Portugal did. Here's Portugal on a map. And it all started with this guy, Henry the Navigator. So we're going to fill out a timeline, and if you click on the timeline, you can edit inside the little boxes, And so you're just going to click in that box, the first box, 1460, and type Henry's Expeditions, make it to West Africa. That was what we talked about in our previous lesson. Okay, today we're going to fill in all the rest of these boxes. We're going to go with these guys first. So these are the other Portuguese sailors that sail around Africa. The first one is Bartolomeu Dias. The second one is Vasco da Gama. So here's a map that shows you the Portuguese routes that were taken by these three explorers. Okay, the purple shows voyages by Henry. They're sponsored by Henry. He did go on some of them, but mostly he funded them. Then we have Bartolomeu, sailed around to the tip of Africa. And then we have Vasco da Gama. Notice his route goes further out into the Atlantic Ocean, which is pretty significant because most people were afraid to go that far away from the coast, right? Where they can see the land if they're sailing close to it, but when they're out here, they can't see it. And that's where they get a little bit nervous about all the things that exist out there. But he goes around Africa, up the coast here, establishes new trading routes, new trading posts, and makes it all the way to India. Okay, so we're going to draw on the map. If you click on your map and select the line tool, scribble, you're going to draw a line that goes from Portugal around the coast to here. And this is Bartolomeu Dias, 1488. Now, you don't really have to know the year, but it is important that you know who took this trip. Okay, and on your timeline, you're going to add 1488, Bartolomeu Dias sails around the tip of Africa. So here's another map for Vasco da Gama. All right, we're going to start up here. Draw a line. Again, he follows the western coast of Africa and then out into the ocean, almost to Brazil, actually. He gets pretty far out there, up around the coast of Africa here to India. We're going to add to our timeline. 1498, Vasco da Gama sails around Africa to India. Now, notice I left this one blank, and that is for a reason, because something happened between 1488 and 1498. Can you think of who belongs here? Think about that. We're going to watch a video on Vasco da Gama, and I want you to fill in your notes some important things that he did for Portugal with his expedition.
Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama was the first person to successfully sail from Europe around Africa to Southeast Asia.
Vasco da Gama was the one who opened up the maritime trade route between Europe and Asia. In my view, his going through the South Atlantic and around the Cape was equivalent to our putting a man on the moon.
Born to a noble family in Sines, Portugal, around 1469, Vasco da Gama took to the sea at an early age.
Vasco da Gama worked on merchant ships in the king's service, learning how to be a navigator, learning all of the things that he would later need to know in order to command an expedition.
Da Gama earned a commission to find a sea route to India and set sail with a 4-ship expedition in July 1497 from Lisbon down the coast of Africa.
So the prevailing winds move north, you're trying to sail south. Da Gama sailed out into the Atlantic, right? Basically almost as far as Brazil.
Once there, Da Gama was able to use the prevailing southern winds to take him south past Africa.
What's historic about Da Gama's voyage around the Cape of Good Hope is precisely that Da Gama figured out how to do this. He is the first one successfully to get into the Indian Ocean, work his way up the coast of East Africa, and ultimately reach India.
The water route from Europe to Asia was very important because it gave direct access to the spices of the Far East.
Vasco da Gama is welcomed as a hero on his return to Lisbon to 1499, because the profits made from the goods that he had brought back from India demonstrated the wealth that could be achieved from this new route linking Portugal directly with Indian Ocean markets.
Da Gama covered more than 24,000 miles in his historic trip to India, and of the 170 original crew members, only 54 made it home alive.
In 1502, King Manuel tapped Da Gama to lead this larger expedition to again initiate trade directly between Portugal and the spice markets of India. This expedition, from the Portuguese point of view, is a success because Da Gama is able to force his way into the markets. And when I say force, I mean using cannons to literally blast his way into the harbor and force the rulers to trade with him.
Upon Da Gama's return to Portugal 2 years later, he retired from exploration and became King Manuel's advisor. However, in 1524, the new king, John III, persuaded him to return to India to become its viceroy. He died in India in 1538.
Because Vasco da Gama found this route to India, he succeeded in making Portugal a principal supplier of high-profit luxury commodities like pepper to the European markets. This in turn made the Portuguese state extremely wealthy and turned Portugal into a great power.
All right, so what is the significance of Vasco da Gama's expedition? Hopefully you were able to get some good information. Here are some sample answers. Okay, first of all, he figured out how to sail around Africa. The video said that a lot of the winds were going northward and he's trying to sail south. So to be able to do that is a big accomplishment. Another example of what you could have written is that he established a line of trade with India, a direct line of trade with India. And another thing you could write down is that because of his trade, because of his direct line and access, Portugal became a wealthy and powerful country. So if you look at this map here, we see Portugal in the purple, and then over here we have Spain. Now remember, Ferdinand and Isabella are united, have created a Catholic Spain, and now it's time for them to take the next step into the world of exploration. So they're going to follow in Portugal's footsteps, but instead of going south, they are going to go west. And here are Ferdinand and Isabella, and they decide to fund and sponsor this guy, Christopher Columbus, to travel west to try to find the Spice Islands or the Indies. So Christopher Columbus knew that the world was round, but most people at this time did, because if you remember, Aristotle knew the world was round, and a lot of people of this time, especially educated people, have studied Aristotle, and Aristotle's teachings are used in most schools. So it's pretty common knowledge, but nobody had ever proven it before. So this was kind of a big deal. Yeah, Aristotle knew the earth was round. They figured that out already. So we're going to watch a video on Christopher Columbus. In the next part of our video, part 2, we're going to begin right here. So you guys are going to exit out of this video, and you're going to find part 2 to continue your lesson.